So hello everybody, welcome to this webinar about Airlock Gateway 8.0. My name is Martin Burkhardt and here with me is Mike Dujak. During the presentation, as you probably know, there is this question and answer tab in the GoToWebinar control panel. You can just ask questions there and we will answer them. And if at the end some questions are still unanswered, we will then go through them. Okay. So the agenda for today. First, we'll talk about Airlock Anomaly Shield. This part will be presented by Mike. And then I will go through the various aspects of Airlock Gateway 8.0, like OS migration, system backup features, REST API, and some miscellaneous features, and also talk about discontinued features in the end. But the first part will be about extensions of the Anomaly Shield. And with this, I'm already handing over to Mike. So, okay. Perfect.
Yes, you should be seeing now my screen. Welcome everybody also from my side. I'll be talking to you about the Anomaly Shield. And just as a reminder on what the Anomaly Shield is, I'll start with a quick look on how the Anomaly Shield works as opposed to what we already have in the gateway today. So it's really about different perspectives. When we're looking at traffic, then today in the gateway, we inspect every single request for malicious content. We try to determine if it's a known attacker. The typical capabilities here are deny rules and IP blacklist, and they're absolutely excellent when we want to determine known attack patterns and defend against them. Now, with the Anomaly Shield, we extended the reach because we wanted to see on whether we can determine unknown and automated attacks. And to achieve this goal, we had to shift perspective. Instead of looking at single requests, we're looking at requests in a session, and we're trying to determine if a session is actually behaving normally, like we would expect from our users, or if it deviates from that normal behavior, and that's what we consider an anomaly. Now, this did not happen overnight. The Anomaly Shield complements the existing deny rules and IP blacklist. So with both in the gateway, we think that you have the best of two worlds, and you really want to use both the deny rules and the IP blacklist together with machine learning. Now, this did not happen overnight, and there's quite an evolution history behind the Anomaly Shield. It started out with Gateway 7.6 when we did everything in the expert settings on the command line. Fortunately, we were able to find customers and partners that worked with us together, were willing to share their experience and also their data, so that with 7.7 we were able to come up with a simple configuration UI. That made the task of configuring the Anomaly Shield a lot simpler and a lot more convenient. With 7.8, we added more efficient machine learning sensors, really augmenting the capability to detect automated traffic bots, vulnerability scanners, without any support or without any additional configuration required. And now with 8.0, we complemented the user interface, and it's now fully integrated. You can do all things in the user interface, and you do not need to go back to the command line of the Airlock Gateway. So I could now show you quite a few slides, and for those that download the presentation, they will see what slides I've prepared. But I think that is probably not what you as engineers want to see. So let's delve into the system that runs the Anomaly Shield, and let's discuss a little bit of what has changed or what is new in version 8.0. The first thing you'll notice when you boot up an 8.0 gateway is that the Anomaly Shield now only has one menu entry here. In the past, it was too many entries. We condensed everything into one menu entry. We felt it was more organical and instead of spreading it out. On the other side, you'll see here that the configuration is a little bit more complicated. We now have 3 tabs, and I'll explain those tabs right to left, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but the 2 tabs on the right-hand side, traffic matches and trigger rules, are really general configurations that you can reuse in all the different Anomaly Shield applications that you're going to configure later. So let's look at traffic matches. Traffic matches do exactly what they say they do. If we look into one of these traffic matches here, you configure a name, and then you just configure a condition on when this matcher will match. So here it says header name is X exception, and the header value is do not block. If a request comes in with those 2 settings, then it will match this filter, and the Anomaly Shield will respect that wherever you use that traffic matcher. You can also have traffic matches, for example, here for IP addresses. So you have an IP list of internal vulnerability scanners from your CISO, and then you can exclude those or filter those internal vulnerability scanners from the traffic that the Anomaly Shield will consider. The second tab is also a generic tab. You only have to configure that once and can apply it all over the Anomaly Shield, or triggers and rules. If we're looking at triggers, a simple trigger would be configured here. You give it a name. You can configure, if you want, to a minimal bit count. But the important thing is down here, the pattern, because with this pattern, you're basically saying which of the machine learning sensors have to report an anomaly for this trigger to respond and then issue or run the corresponding rule. So what do we see here? Well, the 4 sensors, graph matrix cluster, isolation forest, status card meta, and timing cluster that are with a red dot are those that have to report an anomaly. The other 2 we don't care because they're set to gray. So if this trigger pattern matches, then a rule will be executed, and let's look at the rule that matches this trigger. That's the hard action terminate session rule, and it does exactly what the name says. It will terminate the session if the trigger malicious session will find a session that is anomalous enough to match this trigger. And in the actions, what you configure here is you can log the incident, you can tag the session as anomalous. Now these 2 will create log entries in the log, and we'll see them later. Log incident would create an anomaly 400 message, whereas tag session as anomalous creates an anomaly 401 message. Terminate session will create a block in the security gate, and we will see that this is a block 155 message that we'll also find in the logs. We could also block the IP address for a limited amount of time, or we could remove roles if we have an integration with Airlock IAM. So these are triggers and rules. Let's go back to the applications and look at the new application overview panel. Here you'll find information that you've already seen in the past. The first is the name of the Anomaly Shield application, and it tells you on whether data collection and or detection and response are turned on or off. It will now, and this is new information, it will also give you information about the models. Now, the models that are at the core of the Anomaly Shield, they're basically the mathematics that allows you to determine what's anomalous and what not. So to get to a model, you have to train first. You have to collect data, then use the training functionality of the Anomaly Shield, and only then you will have a model. And the model can be in 2 states. It can be enforced, means it's active, and it will really be applied against traffic that that this gateway is seeing, or it can just be prepared. So you can train a model, make sure it's ready, but you don't have to enforce it yet. The last thing we see here on the overview is this tiny little button, and it really leads you to the model training, and that's what we're going to look into right now. This screen allows you to train new models. You can best explain it from bottom to top. Since we wanted to have the enforced model on top, because this is really the most important thing of the model training screen, that you have an enforced model and the Anomaly Shield will actually apply traffic against it. But to train new models, you will start at the bottom. The thing that you find down here is called DB Cluster Sync. A very complicated name for a very simple idea. If you're running a high availability cluster in your production and you have active passive gateways in this cluster, then this little button, merge remote data, will basically take the data from all the gateways in the cluster and copy them locally, merge that data so it's available for training. Why do you want to do that? Well, our recommendation is that if you're training new models, you do that on the passive node in an active passive cluster. On the passive node, nothing can happen. The Anomaly Shield is programmed in a way that it will only use a limited amount of CPU, but still, doing it on the passive cluster is a good idea because the passive cluster is idle anyway. So you have to collect all the data onto this passive system, and merge remote data is exactly the button that you need to do it. Once you've done that, you will find that training task here will show you that there is a number of sessions, and that the selected sessions depend on the range of data that you're choosing. You could basically say, I'm taking data from July, or I'm taking the data from 1st of July until end of September. Whatever you do, it will automatically tell you how many sessions are in there, so you know that you have enough data for sensible training. The recommendation is at least 10,000 sessions, but you can do it with 100,000 sessions or 1 million sessions. That is really not a problem. Too few is not a good idea. Once you hit the train button here, it will run for a couple of seconds to a couple of minutes, depends on the number of CPUs you've allocated to the machine and on the number of sessions that you selected for this training run. As soon as it's done, it will fill out the prepared model information, and you can see here the training was already run sometime in November. And you have a few buttons as well. You can enforce the model, which basically just moves this model to the next stage. I won't do that since this application here is only for training. And you can export the data. Exporting a model is important. If you're on the passive node, then you want to be able to export it. And on the active, you will go up here to the enforced model, import it, and you have the prepared model from the passive node, and you can use it as the enforced model on the active node. Of course, if you're in a production environment, you probably also want to enforce the model immediately on the passive node, so that if there is a failover, the Anomaly Shield will work normally. You can also use the export-import function to transport models, for example, to test systems or integration systems. If you want to run smoke tests and see whether the new mobile application behaves the same way as the old one did, and run that and run tests with the Anomaly Shield to make sure that you don't have to retrain your models. So this is it for model training. Entirely new feature, had to be done on the command line in the old days, but now with 8.0, it's all in the GUI. The last thing I want to show you is just for completeness, the Anomaly Shield application. Not a lot of things have changed here. You still have here the application section. You see the application, the mappings that are configured for these application. The configuration itself is done on the mapping and not in the Anomaly Shield. You have then the section training data collection. Here it's turned off. If I turn it on, it will immediately open up. You see that the traffic filters that we already configured can be used here. For example, in training data collection, I could use my vulnerability scanner rules so that the CISO's vulnerability scanners will not show up in the training data that I collect. I'll turn this off again to make the screen a little bit smaller. And looking at the anomaly detection, you can lock the sessions when session anomaly pattern changes is a recommended setting. This will cause the anomaly 200 messages to appear in your logs. If you turn that off, like you set it to never, then you'll never see an anomaly 200 message in your logs, whatever your tastes. Again, you can filter traffic. If you filter them at this point here in the anomaly detection, then the later anomaly response will never be applied because the entire session will already be excluded from the detection. And last but not least, there is the anomaly response. You can have two settings. Either you set it to log only or execute actions, which basically means that in log only, the Anomaly Shield will only tell you what it would do. In execute actions, it will not only tell you what it would do, but it will actually do it. So if you have rules like these here, terminate session or drop role, the terminate session will actually really create a block 155 log message, and it will block this particular session, so the attacker has to start over again. Also for the anomaly response, it's possible to use filter rules to exclude certain traffic from blocking. As an example, the vulnerability scanner, we allow the anomaly detection on the vulnerability scanner because we want to see in the logs on whether the anomaly shield detects those, but we don't want the vulnerability scanner not to be able to attack the backend applications, because maybe the CISO wants to know whether the backend application does its job correctly and is configured securely, and not that the anomaly shield is doing its job. So last but not least, let's look into the logs just to show you quickly on how these things work here. Now, I have a little script that I can run, and it will generate traffic. And that traffic has been prepared by one of our data scientists. And if I look into the logs, I refresh them quickly. There's a new session in here. And this session, of course, behaves a little bit anomalously because that's what our data scientists wanted to achieve. So let me quickly switch the display here. So we see all the important things for the Anomaly Shield. Now, what I want to see is the anomaly 401 messages. Why the 401 messages? Well, as I mentioned before, those are those that mark a session as anomalous. It tells me here which rule has matched, and it also tells me which trigger has matched. Now, what I want to see is one where a trigger malicious session has matched, because those are the interesting ones, because we expect here that the session has been terminated. Now, this seems to be an interesting session here, so let's fixate this. I'll delete the filter, refresh the screen, and now we're seeing the top of this session, meaning the last few requests from this session. And I'll just quickly go through it. The 401, the anomaly 401, already seen that before. Now here is a block 155, meaning that the security gate really decided to terminate that session. It also tells us that it did that. And as I mentioned before, here we have an anomaly 200 message, which gives me the detail on why the anomaly shield determined that this session has been considered anomalous. So how does it do that? Well, these are the values that it calculated based on the session behavior. These are the thresholds that are configured into the core of the anomaly shield. And now it just compares the calculated values with the thresholds. And as a result, it gives us this pattern here. And this pattern just tells us that connection metrics is a 1, so it's considered anomalous. Graph metrics cluster is considered 1, therefore anomalous. The isolation forest as well. Multiple countries is not anomalous, but status code matters and timing cluster is also considered 1, so anomalous. And this is a really bad session because it achieved a bit count of 4, and we definitely can terminate that with a good conscience, because this cannot be a normal user that has been using our system. So that's it from my side on the Anomaly Shield. I hope you found that interesting. And I'm handing back to Martin because he's going to tell us about a move that is going to take place.
Okay, so I'm just trying to change back to my screen. I hope everyone is seeing all these moving boxes again. So thanks a lot, Mike. So where have we
Martin, the screen share has not yet worked. I'm still seeing the channel Gateway 8.
Okay, let me try again. It tells me it's showing my screen.
Now it worked.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Perfect.
You're on.
Okay. So where have we moved and what have we moved? Well, we have moved from CentOS to Alma Linux. And it has been already notified before that CentOS has reached end of life. So full updates have already stopped in 2020, and security updates will still be provided until 2024, which is good for us because it covers Airlock Gateway 7.8, which is still based on CentOS. But that also makes clear that we had to act now, because if we built another release on CentOS, and as you know, releases are supported 1 year after the following release is published. So we would have ended up in a time frame where we had no security updates regarding the operating system, and that would not have been acceptable. So we had to do this change now, and that's also the reason why we have a major version 8 in the gateway version numbering. So what about Alma Linux? It's a binary compatible distribution with Red Hat Enterprise Linux, just as CentOS. It's also open source, it's free, and it has a focus on long-term stability. So that's exactly what we actually need. So the downside of this change is that in order to upgrade to Airlock Gateway 8, you need to do a full installation. So it's not possible to just add an update to your 7.8 system. And we have actually prepared a step-by-step instruction in the manual on how to migrate a failover cluster setup from 7.8 to 8.0. So that should actually help you to get through with it. And you can do that if you want to do all the extra steps. You can also do that without even losing session information. Next topic is system backup. So if you're administrating Airlock gateways, you probably know this system backup menu when you log in using SSH, using the menu user. What's new now is that you can actually configure the files that are included in this backup. So up to date, you just had the current configuration in the backup, and now you can actually enable files and directories in this file here. So when you choose number 3 in the menu, this will open up this file here, and it's all commented out by default, and it directs you to this backup conf file, which has the default list elements in it. So if you look at this file again, it will show you that in addition to the current configuration, it will also back up this Airlock custom settings folder, which also includes the file that you just opened. So I just highlighted that using the yellow background. So if you're changing the configuration of your backup, that's already included in the backup. And it also includes NCipher file configuration files by default. So that's if you're using HSM devices. But you can here in this file, you can uncomment certain lines. You can add files if you want to. By default, in this custom settings folder, it has quite a lot of settings in it. If you're changing syslog ng configuration or some basic Apache settings or add-on Tomcat settings, so that's all stored in this custom settings folder. And the handling of the backup file is just as you're used to. That didn't change. REST API extensions. So a frequent feature request regarding the REST API was that customers wanted to change deny rule configurations. And that's what's now possible with 8.0. You can actually control deny rule group settings, such as the security levels, exceptions, and the logging mode, whether you want to have enforced or log only, or also additional logging. And you can also add exceptions to deny rules. In addition, you can configure CSRF tokens on the mappings. You can add error pages using the REST API. You can control global expert settings. Up until today, it was only possible to do it on mappings or backend groups. And you can read out the gateway version in case you have an environment with different stages where you're just having different versions of gateways in place. And just to show you here, when you're using this new endpoint, there's this short name in the path of the resource. That's just a human readable name of deny rule groups. And you will find these names in the documentation, or you can query the API and just list all the available deny rule groups. And as always, I'm just informing you that we have made updates to the deny rules themselves. As you probably know, we have two programs running on Echo 1 and one on Bug Bounty Switzerland, where we expose our rules to white hat hackers. And they contribute substantial information to how we could even improve certain rules to fix evasions that were maybe possible. But also we improve rules regarding false positive rates. So when we say we harden the rules, it's not just to make them more strict all the time. So we also try to have a very low false positive rate. Okay, now some miscellaneous features that have been added to 8.0. One that is very nice when you're using policy learning. Up until today, you had to accept or delete suggestions made in the policy learning dashboard. Now you have an additional button here. It's called Adapt a Suggestion. And what it does, it opens the suggestion that would be activated. And now you can just change the patterns, for instance. And that's very useful in this example if you're adding an exception for a REST endpoint and then include some dynamic elements in the path, for instance, resource IDs. Then, of course, you don't want to add the exception for all the different resources. You probably don't even know all of them. You can replace this ID with a fragment, with a regular expression fragment that just matches all of the IDs that could occur in these calls. Another example would be if you have a JSON object with arrays in it, then also these array indices, they are kind of also very specific to an individual element, but you don't want to have different exceptions for element 3, 4, 5, 6. So you would just replace this index with a pattern matching integer numbers. Okay, Backend SSL TLS settings. You probably know we have introduced this in the configuration center that's possible to configure backend SSL settings in the graphical UI. We added this checkbox. It's in yellow here. Allow insecure server certificate verification. And that's actually not a functional checkbox. It's here to make this validation error go away that you see on the right side. So it says you should add verify host name and CA certificates in order to make sure that you have a secure backend connection. So, and the validation is an error, so that will actually prevent activation of the configuration. And we just decided you should be aware of unsecure configurations. And if that's okay for you, because you may be in a development environment or on a local machine, you could just take this checkbox allowing secure server configuration. But that led to certain problems, and one of them is that the validator shown is not aware of expert settings. So customers had actually a secure configuration because they configured the backend SSL server certificates using global expert settings. But then they had to go through an audit and click this allow insecure server checkbox, because otherwise they could not activate the configuration. So that was really annoying. So we revised this section in the configuration center. The validator has actually been removed, but it was important to us that it's still an explicit decision of the administrator whether to turn on server certificate validation or not. So we grouped all these settings together and added an on and off button to just make sure that you're taking this decision explicitly. And of course, the expert settings still work. Okay, that brings us to the discontinued features. They have often been announced. So now it's actually the time that legacy deny rules have gone. The best procedure to migrate to 8.0 is to integrate on level standard or basic or strict on a previous version, for instance 7.8, and then import this configuration to 8.0. However, if you missed certain mappings that have still legacy deny rules enabled, during the import they will be switched to level standard. And a message will be written to the log indicating this automatic change. So after importing an old configuration, just search the log for this message here in yellow, the conf 0001, because that indicates that you might have missed certain mappings, and just check whether it's okay to run this mapping on level standard and whether exceptions are still appropriate for this. And IP patterns have been removed. Here we recommend to use the central IP address list feature, which we have seen in Mike's presentation. That can also be used in AnomalyShield traffic matches. Localhost support, if you don't know what that means, it's okay, it's gone now anyway. And also RAID integration in Airlock tools for status monitoring has been discontinued. If you want to monitor RAID, we recommend that you use the native tools that are available to you, for instance, ILO. For all the details regarding changelog and things that you have to consider before upgrading, as usual, check the release notes. So that's already the end of the webinar. I will have a look at the questions if there are any. It seems that there are no questions so far. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them. Or otherwise, you can always, of course, reach out to us, open up a case, or contact your partners. And of course, the webinar is recorded. So if you have colleagues that missed this presentation, it will be possible to send them a link afterwards. Tomorrow there will be the presentation in German. Okay, so there's some questions coming in now. How long will the latest 7x version still be supported? I'd like to refer you to the life cycle page on TechZone. There's a table that lists all of the versions that are currently supported and the end of support date. So if I remember correctly, it will be October 23 for Airlock Gateway 7.8. And it's difficult for us to sell extended support for this version because it's based on an OpenSSL version 1.1.1 that also is end of life. And just as I mentioned on the slide regarding the OS migration, we are not able to extend the support for a long time because the operating system itself will be end of life. Okay, so I think that we will just end the official presentation here. We will stay some minutes longer to answer questions, and we thank you for your attention.